Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Mark Carney's recent visit to Beijing did not come with fury, rhetoric, or dramatic gestures as some may have expected. In fact, his tone was very measured. It was very calm. And it may be fair to say that Mary's trip to China has become one of the most consequential signals of strategic realignment Canada has made in decades. In the era of Donald Trump's renewed tariff politics, his threats, 247 threats, and claims that the Western Hemisphere must be controlled by Washington. Carney openly suggested something that would have been unthinkable just a few years ago. Carney suggests that China, not the United States, now looks like the more predictable and desirable trading partner. That signal idea captures how much the global economic landscape has shifted. Carney, who is a former central banker known for caution rather than bravado, left China with an agreement that opens the door to electric vehicles and auto sector investment from the world's second-largest economy. Before Trump's second term, such a move would have been politically radioactive in Ottawa. You would agree. But today, this is actually framed as a necessity. And just think about it. If Canada understands this now, what can be said about the rest of the world? Canada's China policy has always moved largely in a lockstep with Washington. So Ottawa stayed aligned with the United States, but that alignment is now collapsing. Less than 2 years ago, Canada mirrored Washington's tough stance by matching 100% tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles, which aimed to shield the deeply integrated North American auto industry. Beijing retaliated as expected, as it should have. And then Donald Trump actually returned to the White House and changed the equation entirely. Tariffs landed on Canadian goods. Global import taxes were imposed on autos, on steel and aluminum. No major U.S. ally actually felt the blow quite like Canada, whose supply chains run back and forth across the border every single day. So Canada's vulnerability is structural because of its immense dependence on a single trading partner that just happens to be the United States. Roughly 70% of Canadian exports go to the United States, and most imports come from there as well. So Carney is now pursuing to double Canada's non-US exports within a decade, and that is of course a very ambitious plan. Experts say that the goal is close to impossible without some kind of a deal with China, and so Carney traveled to China to make it work. From Carney's perspective, the message to Washington is very simple, and the message is Canada has options. Canada is testing alternatives, and it appears to be willing to be flexible if circumstances change. Under the new Canada-China deal, China will be allowed to export up to 49,000 EVs a year to Canada at a low tariff rate. The agreement opens the Canadian auto market to joint venture investments by Chinese car makers too. As we know very well by now, Chinese firms have truly upended the global EV industry, and Chinese BYD has now overtaken Tesla as the world's top electric car seller. The two leaders signed non-binding memoranda and letters of intent as well, and many of these documents are simply meant to restore aspects of the relationship to where they stood years ago. So some of these documents are not groundbreaking by their nature. What's quite funny is that reaction in Washington was very mixed. The United States Trade Representative called the deal problematic, and members of Congress actually raised alarms, believe it or not. But Trump himself appeared to be unusually and quite suspiciously relaxed. He said that it was fine that Carney went to China and that they made a deal. He said it was actually sensible for Carney to sign a trade deal with China, adding that if you can get a deal with Beijing, then you should. And of course we know that Trump is planning his own visit to China very, very soon. The problem for Carney is that Trump's indifference, or the indifference that he sort of portrayed, can turn into aggression very quickly, and Mark Carney is fully aware of that. There are commentators who believe that Mark Carney is playing a 5D chess game. They believe that he's not really searching for alternative trade partners, but rather the goal with his visit to Beijing was to identify the smallest concession Canada could make on EV tariffs that would persuade China to roll back its own punitive measures, particularly on Canadian agricultural exports. So in other words, Canada is just focusing on damage control, some experts claim, and that is quite possible too. I'm sure that there are multiple angles here, and Canada is unlikely to lean into stronger ties with China if it knows that it would backfire in its relations with the Trump administration. Recently, Carney made a very interesting and rational, I would say, remark. He said, quote, "We take the world as it is, not as we wish it to be." That statement signals a more programmatic approach to international relations and to establishing and maintaining relations with foreign states that have traditionally been viewed as adversaries. And that could of course signal his willingness to set a more pro-Canada and less subordinated to Washington economic policy. Of course, that remains to be seen, but this is a very interesting and symbolic shift in his rhetoric and in his actions as well. Some economists and investors have welcomed the shift. They argue that the previous government subordinated commerce to virtue signaling, and in their view is simply acknowledging that in today's world, economics actually drives diplomacy, not the other way around. Whether this shift pays off remains to be seen. It is quite uncertain at this time. It is, however, clear that leaders in the Western Hemisphere, those who are not vassalized by the United States, are feeling increasingly uncomfortable with the recent developments, especially the development since January the 1st, 2026. It seems that every morning we wake up to jaw-dropping news, and the news actually upends accepted norms, and it is clear that 2026 will be a lot more volatile and unpredictable than perhaps we imagined before. In conclusion, what Carney's visit to Beijing ultimately signals is not his abandonment of the United States, of course, but rather Carney's acceptance of a fractured global order where middle powers such as Canada must constantly rebalance. And this might be Canada's attempt to start doing just that. I will definitely keep you posted on Substack, on Patreon, as well as on YouTube. Stay tuned. Thank you for joining me. Like, subscribe, and share. Thank you so much for your support, and I look forward to seeing you here tomorrow. Bye for now.